Rare gems. What is a rare gem? And I have the person who wrote a book all about them here to take us inside how this fascinating story about women's basketball, past and present, came to be. The Locked On Women's Basketball Podcast. It starts right now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome. You are Locked On Women's Basketball. I'm Jackie Powell, one of your hosts on this program. Usually I'm here on Fridays. I cover the New York Liberty at the Next, and I've covered women's basketball nationally at many other places. Thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. And remember that Locked On Women's Basketball is brought to you by everyone at the Next. It is a place where we cover women's basketball all the time, and we tell the stories that need to be told each and every day. Subscribe now to support our staff at the Next. And we work oh so hard to bring you this coverage that matters so much. That is $9 a month, $72 for the year. Find us at thenexthoops.com and subscribe. And remember that our pod, Locked On Women's Basketball, is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. Our title sponsor is Prize Picks. This episode is brought to you by them. Prize Picks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Last time we were together, dear listener, I had LaChina Robinson on to talk about how the WNBA's visibility has grown in a decade. And we also reflected upon this incredible piece that Maya Moore wrote called, it was Invisibility, I believe. So we reflected upon that, and we discussed how the visibility of this league is accelerating at an unprecedented pace. But anyway, that was last time. This time, I have a person who I think you all are familiar with. This person named Howard Megdal is here with me to discuss a major project that just came out on May 7th. It is called Rare Gems. And so in segment 1, we're going to get into the origins of Rare Gems. In segment 2, we're going to dive deep into how 4 generations of women created this story and created women's basketball history and women's basketball in the present. And then in segment 3, we're going to talk a little bit about the Minnesota Lynx and the real important role that they play, not only in the history of the WNBA, but in the history or in the current WNBA landscape right now. So that is our framework. Anyway, I have said a lot. Howard, thank you for being here. The first question I have for you is, how did Rare Gems come to be?
So thanks for having me, and thanks for that introduction. I really appreciate it. It's how it came to be is over a period of a few years and some serendipity involved as well. I have been fortunate enough to cover this league for a very long time, which allowed me not only to cover the Minnesota Lynx themselves through their championships, but also through Lindsey Whalen and her transition from playing to coach. And in the midst of doing this, of course, had the incredible opportunity to meet Peps Neuman and Vicki Nelson, 2 trailblazers in this game dating back to the 1960s. And so when you put it all together, and including covering some of the young players who Lindsey Whalen recruited to Minnesota, who are at University of Minnesota right now, in Mara Braun and that incredible class that'll be entering their junior season coming up this year, it was amazing to me how many connections there were between these generations how what one generation did influenced the one that came after, but also how those who came after helped influence and change the way that people like Peps and Vicky thought about women's basketball as well. And so just the more I dug into it, the more it felt to me like, there are these absolutely interlocking connections. We think of history, and women's basketball history no differently, as something that was in some ways preordained, and it simply wasn't. You asked about what rare gems are, and to me, it is something that is hard to find. It is something that is immensely valuable over a long period of time. And it is in these cases, people who ultimately shine. And what they do when we look back on the path to the current moment, which is, of course, incredibly exciting in women's basketball, these are shining examples that have helped lead us on the way to where we are now.
I love that. I think the next thing on my mind is there are some very specific stories that you talk about in Peps and Vicky in particular. And I think I would argue, are the heart and soul of this whole story. But they also, one of their teams was called the Gems. Mm-hmm. Was that sort of how you put one and two together? Like, okay, the figurative concept of what the idiom a rare gem is what you just said. But the fact that Vicky and Peps had a team called the Gems, is that a coincidence? How did they land on this?
No. It's a very specific choice, and I'll tell you why. So for listeners at home, Peps Neuman in high school understood that she wanted to be a professional basketball player, but she is making this decision in the early 1960s. So this is before the WNBA, this is before the WBL, this is over a decade before Title IX. And she had a fair amount of pushback from people, even in her own school. The principal at her school said it was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard. And he is long gone now, but the court at her high school is named after Peps because of all that she has done since. She went out and first joined traveling teams. It ultimately got to a point where she was running a team that the owner of the team said wanted change from Arkansas Gems to Arkansas Lassies. The idea was to be more feminine, was the idea behind that. And so what did Peps do? She said, okay, I know what I need to do. I'm going to start my own team, kept the name as Gems, and went on her own and created something. I think this is as significant, not only a team that played professionally until 1988, but at the same time was in the black every year, had to be making money every year to be able to keep up expenses, to be able to keep people making a living doing the work of playing professional basketball. And that is a part of the women's basketball story that a lot of people don't talk about or are quick to dismiss. And it is absolutely something that is present, is necessary, and helps essentially plant the seeds for a lot of what has made the Minnesota Lynx not only a team that has succeeded on the court, and Cheryl Reeve is a fantastic, enormous reason for this, but have succeeded off the court with the work that Carley Knox has done on the business side with the Minnesota Lynx. Again, people influenced by Peps, by Vicky Nelson, who helped her run this business for so many different years and have created their own pathway as well.
So what's interesting about the whole Gems and Lassies dynamic here is when I think about what a gem is, it's something that shines and that stands out, and it can be feminine and it can be masculine too. It's almost like this non-binary thing. And so, like I think of like a sapphire and how much that shines and how bright it is. And yeah, you could argue that that's a feminine thing. So I see just so much irony in the pushback, which when you all read the book, there will be many moments, I can tell you, I was sitting on a Metro North train where I just laughed out loud. I also was in or at my local hair salon getting my hair done, and I laughed out loud at some of the ridiculousness when it came to these people in power pushing back against women's basketball as just an idea.
Mm-hmm. It's very easy to look at women's basketball and see the limits on progress that were put in place. And as we look back at where women's basketball is, where it is going, where it could be at this moment, it is something that must not be ignored. As soon as there was women's basketball, there were people trying to push back on women's basketball, dating back to the 1890s.
I mean, I will tell a quick aside before we get to our first break, but I was talking to AZ Fudd yesterday, and I sort of said to her, I said, so how do you view the visibility and the perception that surrounds women's basketball? And when did you sort of notice a change? She said that when she was in middle school. So AZ Fudd is around what? She's 20 now, 21.
Yeah.
So when she was in middle school, so maybe I want to say like 7 years ago, she would talk about her dreams to play college basketball and professional basketball in the WNBA. And her classmates would say that that was silly and ridiculous. Right. So 7 years from 2024. So what, 2017?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this stuff that you all will read about in Rare Gems, as Howard just said, it has continued to creep up over and over and over again. And that's something that obviously us at Locked On Women's Basketball and at The Next have been working really hard to try to combat. But anyway, we could spend a whole podcast talking about that history. But coming up, we're going to dive into the 4 generations of women. We've started talking about them a little bit. Peps and Vicky, Carley and Cheryl. How does Lindsay Whalen and Paige Bueckers, Simone Augustus, Maya Moore? We're going to talk about how this all weaves together. But first, I want to tell you all about our wonderful friends at Prize Picks. And so we are obviously past the March Madness and college basketball season. We are now in the beginning to mid-May. And now is the time where some pretty big moments in pro basketball are happening. The NBA playoffs and potentially the most highly anticipated WNBA season maybe since year one. So get in on the playoff action and the WNBA regular season action and win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the NBA's postseason and the WNBA's regular season. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey. Well, we're not in college season anymore, but college basketball entries on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Prize Picks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Thank you, Prize Picks. I also want to chat with y'all about eBay Motors. So, passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, alternators. I have experience with broken alternators and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Thank you, eBay Motors. We appreciate you. And so here we are.
Can I ask you a quick question just before we get back to it? You mentioned the NBA playoffs are coming. Is that men's basketball?
I think it might be.
How many teams are in the NBA? Do you have any idea? Is it like
30?
Can they just and it's just an idea I'm just throwing out there. Like the Pacers, I think, are in Indiana, right? Or the NBA team.
Mm-hmm.
Can't they just call them like the M Fever? Can't they do it? I mean, wouldn't that be easier? It's just to learn all these NBA teams is really confusing.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, we just heard today that there will be now a 14th WNBA team. That's still less than half of.
I pay close attention to the WNBA, and then to have to learn all these other names, it's unfair, really, at the NBA. Anyway, I'm sorry to digress, but go ahead.
Anyway, before we get back to these 4 generations of women, I do want to remind you all about Locked On Sports Today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without some of the screaming that you deal with maybe when you turn on First Take or Fox Sports. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV Channels app, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Okay, it's back to Rare Gems. I am here with the author of the book, the one and only Howard Megdal. So I think what is so fascinating about this is you have women from different periods of history here that had very different circumstances that they were dealing with. But at the same time, some of these circumstances were similar. So we talked about Peps and Vicky. That's generation 1.
Yeah.
Generation 2, that's Cheryl and Carley, correct?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's more Cheryl and because she's going through it as a player than, Carley is sort of coming into it as a person on management side around the same time that we see Lindsay Whalen on the player side. There is overlap in that way, but Cheryl's doing it at a time where we're a good 15 years into Title IX at the time that she is finishing up at LaSalle. And we talked about this in the book, not just Cheryl, but the women she grew up with and around were these people who were excelling on the basketball court and frankly, again and again, multiple sports, as Cheryl did as well. And yet opportunities were not there to be able to continue forward. It's like where the sidewalk ends for a lot of these players. Karen Healy Lang finished up as the best player in Temple history. And I talked to her, and she's a lifelong friend of Cheryl's dating back to high school. And she's essentially there her senior year of college saying, well, I guess it's time to find a real job, and that's it. And there's not the way forward. And so again, it goes back to, for me, who are the people who are creating that pathway forward? And it is, I think, neither coincidental nor surprising that both Cheryl and Carley found ways to do this, but had to build it themselves in all these different instances. In Cheryl's case, it was eventually taking on a $5,000 a year job as an assistant coach with the WNBA team, the Charlotte Sting, that promptly declared that it wouldn't exist anymore because of a lack of investment from its owner. And in Carley's case, it was taking multiple jobs that didn't pan out despite success she had selling tickets. The Detroit Shock being one such example of this, because of people who simply weren't willing to invest. So you just see it again and again, needing to create the pathway. And in some of these instances, going forward, having people push back and having subsequent generations having to go up that hill once again.
Right, right. So I think what I'm also really curious about is how you, I guess, weaved those pioneers in with some of the women's basketball names, player names that a lot of us know and love. And so I'm talking about, obviously, you mentioned Lindsay Whalen, Simone Augustus, Maya Moore, and Paige Bueckers.
Mhm.
How exactly did you weave what we know about them in with maybe some of what we don't know about them, if that makes sense?
It does. And so again, in all of these cases, it's a question of what are the challenges that they are facing? How are they similar to those who came before, and how are they different? And there are, in all these instances, and to me, this is the women's basketball story writ large, is always this question of look at the progress we've seen, look at how much further there is to go.
The throughway here is Minnesota. You mentioned that you were looking at the sport writ large, and the Rare Gem story probably has happened all around the country in many different pockets of the United States.
Oh, yeah.
But what about Minnesota makes this either interesting or unique? What do you think links all of these characters in Minnesota?
It's a great question. And so I'd answer it in a similar way to, we talk about like the laboratories of democracy being state governments, and people use that phrase a lot. I think in the aftermath of 1972 and the signing of Title IX, we essentially saw this happen with equality in sports and opportunity, which is, 50 different states have taken it in 50 different ways along the way. Well, in Minnesota, just as in Iowa, which is, obviously the focus of the current book project that I'm working on, you saw different advances that allowed for it to happen. So in Minnesota, Peps Neuman was instrumental in reinstituting. I mean, that phrase should blow people's minds. Reinstituting play between girls basketball teams at the high school level in the early 1960s, because it had been banned for a period of decades in the state of Minnesota, as it was in many states around the country, because of the delicate constitution that women have. And God forbid they should run up and down the floor. How dangerous is that going to be? I mean, junk science used to justify this for the better part of a century, right? And so Peps Neuman wasn't going to have it, and essentially organized the games herself. You put aside the fact that how ridiculous it is that you're asking a high schooler to have to do the work that should already be sitting there waiting for her. Well, that's women's basketball, right? So many women who are flying the plane as they build the plane. And she did this. What does that mean? By the time Title IX comes along, you had interscholastic games happening. Minnesota's a little ahead of the curve. By the time you get to the early part of the 21st century, where you've had the Lynx in place, where you've had what Peps was able to do with her professional team as well, when you have the Lindsay Whalen effect, where this is somebody who is essentially turning high school basketball on the girls' side into sellout must-see events. You are now at the point where Minnesota sees equal participation between boys and girls at the high school level. And essentially it's Title IX fulfilled in that way. Is it perfect? No. Is it ahead of other places? It sure is. And it goes back to how much influence these different figures have had there. But the reason why I think it's so important, and we talk about this closer to the end of the book, where you're seeing a lot of WNBA teams implementing things that the Minnesota Lynx were doing a decade ago.
I'm going to stop you because I want us to focus a whole segment on that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because that is probably one of the most I said Peps and Vicky are the heart and soul of this. But when we talk about how this project, this book is so important for today, it's because of the current moment and how the Lynx essentially helped architect it. So that is what's coming up. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want us to be so locked in for that. So that is what's coming up. I do want to talk to you all about our good friends at Monopoly Go. And I have to be quite honest with all of y'all. When my sister asks me to play Monopoly, I often say no because it takes so long. And I'm just not very good at it. But that is an aside. But what is brilliant about Monopoly Go is that you can team up with your friends for time tournaments so that it's not going to take so long to complete a game. So you can, work together to build up each other's boards, and you can work as a team rather than against your sibling. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you can unlock. And there's just so much to get. There are unique stickers. You can trade with a friend to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings and heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels exciting and new every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot Pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent freezes. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench or off the floor, where I would play Monopoly, and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. And before we move back to our final segment, I do want to talk about a new product that I've found, and it's called Apostrophe. And so Apostrophe's goal, it's to help you feel confident in your own skin, whether you're dealing with breakouts, signs of aging, or acne scarring. Apostrophe will help you love the skin that you're in. Apostrophe is an online platform that connects you with an expert dermatology team to get customized acne treatment for your unique skin. Through Apostrophe, you can get access to oral and topical medicines that use clinically proven ingredients to help clear acne. What you do is you fill out an online consultation. You also take pictures of your face, and you list your skin goals and your medical history. Apostrophe offers access to prescription treatments for all types of acne. So for me, it's hormonal acne, which pops up once a month. Some of it is facial, even back, chest, hair. You can treat breakouts from head to toe. Also, Apostrophe has this really nice sunscreen that isn't oily and it doesn't smell like the beach. So, you can treat your skin to make sure that you don't get burnt, even when you're not going to the beach. You could just be walking down the street and the sun is so powerful. So we have a special deal for our audience. Get your first visit for only $5 at apostrophe.com/lockedon, where you can use our code, which is locked on. That's a savings of $15. This code is only available to our listeners right here. So to get started, go to apostrophe.com/locked on and use our code locked on at the sign up, and you'll get your first visit for only $5. Thank you, Apostrophe. We really appreciate you. Okay. So I am back here with Howard Megdal, the author of Rare Gems. And so finally, what I want to get into here is how exactly were the Lynx ahead of their time in the WNBA?
In every way, on the court, an ability to understand the way a team fits together, trying to get multiple stars to buy in, They had super teams long before the term super team came into vogue. You already had Simone Augustus. You bring in Maya Moore to be able to join her. This is a team that already had a championship culture in place and added Sylvia Fowles in season and had to figure out how to get that right. To do this again and again and again. Rebecca Brunson was critical of that, but just as much off the floor, the way they were valuing their tickets, the way they were valuing their product. Carley Knox says this, and I think about it all the time. If we don't value our product, nobody else will. And making sure that giveaways were at a minimum to understand, we're not just like, we're going to let you in for free and do whatever we can to fill the building regardless of revenue. You build revenue over time. You make people understand that there is value. And of course, you create a tremendous experience to go along with it. And so much of what you're seeing the league do right now, best practices in other towns and other cities, is coming from that. Practice facilities are a big talking point for a lot of people now. Well, they were there for Minnesota the whole time. So it's such important context, I think, for where we're headed.
And it's interesting because obviously Glenn Taylor's name has been in the news for the MNBA team and for the ownership difficulties there. But I mean, Glenn was investing in the Lynx from when he bought them, right?
Yeah, it's been from right away. And again, co-branding, right? Lynx and Timberwolves branding being together is something that's mattered in Minnesota for a very long time. Now it's the norm for the teams that are also owned, that also own NBA franchises. But at the time, that was novel. It's not anymore, but it's in part, they did it first.
Right. I think the last question I have here for you, Howard, before we sign off and before we tell you all to go buy Rare Gems, which we will do very shortly, is I think what I want to understand is what type of challenges do the Lynx face now because they were the first and because when you talk about super teams, it's Aces and Liberty and, you have the Caitlin Clark movement building with Aaliyah Boston and Indiana. What types of challenges do the Lynx have with all of this coming together?
I mean, the easiest answer to it, and we talk about this, and I try to dive into it with some recent off seasons, is they can't offer something that no one else is offering anymore in this way, right? A team that values its W franchise as much as its NBA franchise. They can't offer that and be alone anymore. A team with a dedicated practice facility but they're not doing that alone anymore. And so as a result, there was a period of time in the WNBA where if you wanted that truly first-class experience, you needed to go play for the Minnesota Lynx. Now there are players who have these options to do it. As we are heading into, we've already had more player movement thanks to the current CBA. If there is a new CBA coming, that most people believe there will be, if the players opt out, as they have indicated they will do, even more so, even more freedom, player movement, something like 85% of the league should be free agents heading into this wild new moment where you have a ton of people investing in current franchises like New York and Las Vegas. And also you have teams that are leveling up, like, Dallas is a great example. Atlanta is a great example. You also have new teams coming, whether it's Toronto or Golden State or, let us hope for the sake of my commute, Philadelphia.
These are interesting times in the WNBA. And Minnesota, though, they're going to make sure that their presence is known. And that is clearly amplified in Rare Gems. But thank you for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. I want to give a huge thank you to Howard Megdal for joining me today. Howard, please just plug Rare Gems and all of your other work, and please.
I have the privilege of working with Jackie Powell at The Next. Go to thenexthoops.com and support all the work that everyone is doing. Jackie is sensational across the board. Yes, you can get Rare Gems anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, You can go right now to the Triumph site itself and get it. I will be doing a signing on May 19th in Marlton, New Jersey. You should follow Rare Gems on Facebook, because as we do more of these signings, I'll be able to tell you all that we are doing. We have events coming up in Philadelphia as well, and likely New York. So let me know if you're interested to learn more. Those are the primary ways to do it. But really just keep supporting what we're doing, because we want to tell these stories and make sure the infrastructure is built so that all the things that Peps, Vicky, right on through to today, what these figures have done in women's basketball, it's sustained, it grows, and it keeps getting bigger.
Hear, hear. Well, before we go, make sure you listen to Locked On Sports Today. It's on YouTube. You can watch it 24/7. It's on YouTube. It's on Amazon Fire TV. Join M. Adler, Hunter Cruz, and Lincoln Schaefer tomorrow on Saturday. But anyway, this has been Jackie Powell and
Howard Megdal.
And we are signing off, and have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.